Hey everybody, today's episode of Identity Crisis is a little bit different than what we were planning. We started off with answering a question that someone had submitted to us, and we ended up going in a pretty different direction that turned into a debate about porn and things that Sasha and I really disagree on, and how to have a healthy debate. We wanted to bring you this episode anyways, though, because we think that what happened is really valuable, and we hope to share it with all of our listeners who are trying to learn about how to navigate some of the difficult parts of having relationships with people that you might disagree with. So with that being said, there are some difficult topics discussed today, including things like porn, sexual abuse, and domestic violence. So please keep that in mind going into the episode.
Yeah, and just to chime in, it got very intense in terms of our clash of ideas, but we did do a debrief off camera, and I just want to reiterate that my respect for you, MK, is only grown, and I admire you and your willingness to debate and discuss and think about different people's ideas and opinions. And like you said, that is crucial for having healthy relationships with other people and with yourself.
Totally agree, Sasha. So with that being said, enjoy the show.
Enjoy the show. Alrighty. Hey everybody, I'm Sasha White.
And I'm M.K. Fain.
And this is Identity Crisis.
Today we wanted to talk to you about a user-submitted question. We've been hearing from a lot of people lately who are feeling discouraged and are feeling a lot of despair around the state of women's rights, especially in the United States with everything that's been happening under the new administration. One young woman in particular reached out to us and asked, "What can you do to get involved?" So today we wanted to talk a little bit about how to battle the despair that seems to be encroaching on what women right now, especially who are concerned about gender identity, and how you can channel that into something productive. So I think I'm going to start by asking you a question, Sasha. You seem like you are always really positive. You have a super bubbly personality and a really good outlook on everything. How do you do it?
Well, thank you, first of all. I do think that I have a very positive personality and outlook, as you said. And I get that comment a lot, but I haven't always been so positive, and I do have a darker side to my psyche and my thoughts. And it's, I guess, been a process of transforming that darker energy and that intense passion for change into productive feelings where I don't ruminate on them obsessively, so I don't lose sleep over it. I don't self-flagellate. Is that the right word? Self-flagellate, where you just beat yourself over and over again with this idea that it's like, this is happening in the world. How can this be happening? And that's normal. It's human nature that we all do that. But I think what we kind of want to talk about today is how to hold forgiveness for those parts of yourself so that you can either let go of them in some ways or channel them into something a little more productive. I mean, how about you, MK? You also have this optimistic exterior. You have an answer for so many questions about what do we do. So how did you get to that point?
Yeah, so I definitely, like you, was not always very positive and optimistic about this issue. I'm actually naturally a really pessimistic person. People who only know me online might really be surprised by that, because in all of my work, I really do try to actually be pretty positive. And the way that this change came about is through finding a way to channel my negative thoughts and feelings into something productive. When I first got fired for being gender critical, I ended up actually sitting around for a couple weeks in almost complete depression and despair. I was just on my couch. I was barely getting up and getting dressed, just playing video games all day, eating ice cream at noon. And it was just not a good state. But my partner encouraged me to do something productive with everything that I was feeling. And that's actually what led me to creating Spinster, which is a social media platform I run for gender critical women. Once I started doing that, I realized the power of channeling the despair, the anger, the rage into something productive. And sure, not everyone can code and make a website, but we pretty much all have some sort of skill that we can contribute. And when you find an outlet to do that, especially I've found if it's an outlet that allows you to connect with other women on this issue, then that can actually leave you feeling much more positive because you're not just sitting around ruminating on the negative. And I think some of these social media communities, which, I run a social media site, I'm sympathetic to why we're all there. But I think that sometimes if all you do is just engage in this back and forth kind of group rumination on the negative, then it can be hard to feel that that community is actually leaving you feeling more positive and supported in the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. And what you said about how creating Spinster kind of helped lift you up out of that funk. I mean, something a lot of us have been through where we discover that you can't wait for the motivation to strike. You have to be active, and then you're filled with motivation and inspiration. And also the idea that you don't necessarily need to know how it's going to look to be more productive and to feel better, but you can still, if there's what's weighing on you, you don't have to know how to let it go. It's enough to just want to let it go. It really is. It's this strange thing. There can be a psychological block. Like, well, if I have to keep ruminating on how transgender ideology is destroying women's rights because I can't just ignore it because it's happening and it's horrible and it's hurting. It's going to hurt people. You don't have to know that letting go of it will help to be able to let go a little bit of that rumination.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think the more that you're able to acknowledge where your negative feeling comes from, then that actually makes it easier for you to channel it into the right productive thing that's going to make you feel better. So, for example, sometimes like in the gender critical movement, I feel some negative feelings towards some other women who are doing things in the movement. I'm maybe a little embarrassed, but hopefully not too ashamed to admit that I feel jealous of what I see other women doing sometimes. So actually, for example, Sasha, when you first got canceled and there were articles written about your firing, I realized that this might sound really small, but I was actually jealous because when I got fired, there weren't articles about it. I wrote my own article and nobody shared it at the time. So for me, seeing the attention you were getting for a situation that I felt like I should also be getting attention for, I felt jealous. But I tried to acknowledge that that was the feeling that I was having. And then instead of lashing out at you and deciding you were my enemy or something, I reached out to you. And now through that initial reaching out, we actually have a really positive and I think productive relationship because I was able to identify that feeling and take a positive action on it instead and in spite of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love what you said about acknowledging those feelings because I'm definitely of the belief that if you want to make a change in your life, you have to be a little bit forgiving and a little bit elastic to the part of you that does that thing you don't like if you have a vice or something. And if you're just constantly criticizing yourself for it harshly, then it has this heavy emotional weight. Like if you have jealousy and you're saying no, don't be jealous, stop, you're always criticizing yourself for it, then you're going to have this heavy attachment to that. Anytime your brain starts to wander towards that, it's going to start bringing up all these negative feelings. Whereas if you can say okay, I'm jealous. What's my worst fear? Why am I jealous? And then really think of it, really think what's the worst fear? Because you might think of it and realize okay, it's not the worst thing that could happen out of this isn't something that would actually destroy me. And that might be a release of a revelation, or you might find that that really would be a horrible scenario, but you faced it. And there is something freeing about facing it head on with a little bit less emotional attachment.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think for women who are feeling despair right now, I think the key is to identifying what specifically is causing you to feel despair? Of course, we feel despair because women's rights are being eroded. Okay, but let's narrow it down. Do you feel despair because you felt really aligned with the left and now you feel betrayed by the people who are supposed to protect you? Do you feel despair because you have friends, family members, loved ones who are going through something and you see how gender identity is really harming them and you feel empathy for these people who are hurting? Do you feel despair because you are concerned about your own ability to speak freely on a topic that matters to you and you don't like having to feel suppressed all the time? So once you're able to narrow down what specifically you feel despair about, then if, for example, you feel despair because you feel abandoned by the left, then instead of just sitting around feeling negative about that, build a leftist community that can work with you on this issue. Find other leftist women who are, in your area, or, if you have to start online and then move to in person as you get to know people or as the pandemic recedes, then that's a great way to channel that negative despair you're feeling into the hint about what you should be doing. Like whatever it is that you feel upset about, that's the code that's telling you, like, hey, that's the thing that you should take action on.
Yeah, that's interesting. I have to say, it kind of made me think of something, almost a little bit of opposite advice, but I think both would work in different scenarios. But if you have the thing that's like stuck in your craw, the thing that's really bothering you, for me, I will say it was always the truth denialism. It's always the idea that people are praising the emperor's new clothes. And that to me just, it drives me insane. So, that's one thing where I'm not going to let go of that. But there were other things in evaluating my feminism, reevaluating my own beliefs, that I realized these are causing me some level of distress when I scroll past them and see them. But I actually don't think that those are things I need to hold on as deeply painful things. Like, for example, and this is an idea that I want. My point is that you can hold a belief without believing it. You can hold a thought in your head without believing it. You can.
What do you mean? Can you elaborate on that?
Yes. So there's a skill where you can have a thought in your head without rejecting it or accepting it as truth. And it means that you're considering it. It's like under consideration. It also doesn't mean that you have to come to a conclusion on it, but it means you read something new to you and you don't immediately accept or reject it. You just think about it. You just sit with it. And I don't think it's something that we are particularly trained to do in our school system, because we're always trained to respond with our opinion. Like in English class, how we write essays, where it's write a persuasive essay, attack the author's point or support it. And in other cultures that aren't Western academic cultures, they actually do more of developing, of slowing down on that. They wouldn't presume for like an undergraduate to give their opinion on, let's say, like Bakhtin's theories of whatever. And I think that's really valuable, is being able to hold an idea. And this brings me to what I was saying about evaluating my own feminism. Because when I let go of the idea of that I have to agree with every tenet of radical feminism, I let go of a lot of things that were causing me anxiety. And I don't call myself a radical feminist. And it feels so good to have given myself the freedom to decide on each and every issue individually. You might think like that I was a free thinker because I'm gender critical, but I was still conforming to certain aspects. Like the example I was going to give was pornography. Radical feminism, pornography is so irredeemably evil in its innate form, I think. And I realized that I don't necessarily agree that pornography is inherently bad. The porn industry is awful and irredeemable. That's pretty clear, that industry out in Hollywood. But just the very idea of images, like sexual images, that's not something that I need to feel so strongly against. And realizing that as one small example made me kind of let go. Now I can just like scroll past those things, because it's really distressing to constantly be reading stuff that you're supposed to be getting outraged about. And when you're scrolling Twitter, try seeing something that makes you angry and just keep going. Like try just letting it go and letting it fly out the window. And that can be a huge stress reliever.
You know, Sasha, you just actually gave us a perfect opportunity to practice this because as you were talking, I was getting super angry.
Okay.
Because I definitely align with the radical feminist position on pornography. And I could sort of, as you were talking, I could feel in me this, it's hard to describe, but it feels like a bubbling up of like, oh, something's coming, like, and you kind of start to tense up a little bit. Like I could feel my shoulders tensing and I could feel like blood rising to my face. I think I actually could even see on the camera, like my face was getting a little bit redder. And so I think that a lot of times when we have this feeling, we're trained, especially by social media, to immediately lash out, not just at the idea, but at the person, to see that the person who just had this idea that feels so like that causes this negative emotion in us, that person must be like inherently bad in some way, that because you caused this feeling in me, then you are the problem. And something that I've had to learn, and you know, there was a lot of therapy involved in this, is that other people actually don't cause your feelings. Your feelings are caused by yourself, by your body, by your mind, and by what you've been trained to respond to. So the reason that I actually, you know, if I think about this for a second, feel the way that I feel when I heard what you were just saying is because I have had a lot of fights with people about pornography that ended really badly, that ended in those people, you know, treating me negatively, that ended up in, you know, friendships lost, not just on pornography, but on the wider radical feminism issues in general. And I've had a lot of negative experiences when it comes to talking about that issue. And so my response is almost like a fight or flight one, to be like, I either need to like run away from what you're saying, or I need to fight you on it right now. And I think that what you've said about allowing a feeling or a thought to just kind of to happen, and then that's okay. Like I remember in therapy, one thing that I learned, one skill, is when you have a feeling, you can allow it to just run by you like a train. Like imagine you're just standing on the side of train tracks and the train just blows through you and it doesn't stop for you. You don't have to grab onto that train and be dragged along the tracks down with whatever drama your feelings are trying to cause in you. You don't have to try to stop the train and jump in front of it. You can just let it blow right by. And so now, you know, a couple minutes later, after that feeling arose, it's actually blown by. I don't feel angry anymore. I don't feel tense anymore. And instead, I feel like, wow, I actually just learned something about you that maybe in another episode, I would love to discuss with you more to hear why you think that.
Yeah. Gosh, there's so much there. One thing is there's another imagery that I like, that you can imagine your clouds as, or imagine your thoughts as clouds passing across the sky. This is very similar to your train thing. And that fight or flight response. I also don't want to tell people to just ignore that, because that is also a valuable thing. And in fact, it might even be a positive character trait. It's the opposite of apathy. I will say that. And in the most recent episode of Gender, A Wider Lens, which is Sasha Ayad and Stella O'Malley's podcast, Sasha made this comment where she said, all my life, when I'm in a room and I hear someone say something I disagree with, my heart starts pounding until I get to say my belief. And I was like, yeah, I relate to that. And I think you do too.
Yeah.
And
yeah, totally.
And then finally, I mean, you know, it might even be the time now to have a brief exchange about porn, because then we can show people a little exchange about that and how we're having a friendly conversation about it, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good idea. So, okay, why don't you start then? Why do you think that it's okay for there to be sexual images in general? And I think maybe it might be good to start with narrowing down a little bit specifically what you mean. You know, this is a generally not super explicit channel, so we'll try to keep it accessible
Yeah.
in terms of our language on this topic. But yeah, so can you be maybe a little bit more specific about what parts of it you see are okay versus are not?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the word pornography, I think, comes from the Greek meaning the writing graphy, right? It's like writing, graphic. And pornos, I think it meant prostitute, but I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure it meant essentially like the inscribing of prostitution. And that is something I would find a bit difficult to justify is filmed prostitution, which is the vast majority of porn, because the way I see it, this does fall in line with radical feminist theories, even though, like I said, I'm not a radical feminist per se. But that to the exchange of money sort of in a way does nullify the consent. I do agree with that. And I think that if a woman wanted to have sex with you and she had freedom and control over her life, then she wouldn't be asking for the money. Probably.
Right.
I know there are people who disagree with that, but that's one thing. That's what I don't necessarily like. But so I'm not the sex work is work. That's not where I'm coming from. Where I'm coming from, because if something is work, it can still be horrible exploitation. Where I'm coming from is this idea that I'm still figuring out, and that human nature is kind of fucked up and kind of perverted, kind of insanely horny. And I don't think that we should necessarily reject that side of ourselves. I think it can cause more harm to our psyches as women in saying that because I have certain feelings, I'm wrong, or that's wrong, or that just means that I've been poorly socialized by my society and I have no control over that, and I can't live with that. That part of me is horrible. Like, because a lot of women like porn, and I don't necessarily want to believe, I don't know that I believe that they should change themselves. Like, I feel like that's something that is old and ancient and deep in human nature, and we should look at it and examine it without condemning it 100%.
Okay, so I'm going to narrate a little bit about my emotional process during this conversation in hopes that that helps people. So my first instinctual response right now is just to immediately start arguing with you with what my perspective is on it. But I'm realizing that there are actually some things that I still feel like I don't really understand about your position. So I think I'm going to start by asking you more questions about this position. And I think that this is something that feels hard to do because when I do this, it actually feels to a degree like I'm sort of tacitly condoning what you're saying, because by not immediately stating my rejection of everything that you've said, then throwing my feminist analysis at you, then it feels like, wait, am I just letting her say this and like allowing it to be said? And yes, I am, even though I disagree with it, because I want to learn more about your position first before I try to argue it. So I think, Sasha, one thing that I am really wondering about here is actually I have a lot of questions, but the first is, so you're essentially saying that porn where money is not has not exchanged hands, that's so amateur, I think is what's generally called amateur porn.
That point. You're right. I went away from that particular point. So I guess I'm just thinking of pure, just sexual imagery. That's the thing. I'm like, I don't really see a reason to condemn that. If it's like, if it's like amateur, if it's like a relationship where they're happy and they're just taking pictures or videos, I don't see a reason to condemn that.
Okay. So, and are you talking about the creation and the consumption, or both, or do you see those as different in some way?
Well, I don't see anything good about the tech companies that are controlling the consumption of this. And they are just the evilest of the evil and slimiest of the slimy. But
that we agree on.
Yeah, I guess I'm just thinking of something that's more hypothetical. I'm not saying
Okay,
that.
like what? Give me the hypothetical scenario.
The hypothetical is that the two people or whatever are fully want to do it. It's not prostitution. It's not film prostitution. It's just a consensual sex act being filmed. That I don't see.
And you don't see a problem with the consumption of that either. Like so you're okay with that on both ends.
Yeah, and I know there's an argument that that's inherently objectifying because that's when you're on screen, you do become an object. And if you're being masturbated to, I'm sorry, it's getting graphic, that is objectifying you. And that's the belief that I sort of uncritically absorbed when I first read it and learned it. But then I started to realize, like, wait, do I actually agree with that? And I'm not sure that I do.
Okay, so I think my next question. Okay. So I think my next question is maybe digging into this hypothetical a little bit more, because I think a lot of times these conversations about porn, we're really talking, you acknowledge the industry stuff and we seem to agree on that. So what we're talking about is already like a really small minority of porn. And so it's hard to see what specifically we're referencing here. So in this hypothetical, I guess I'm wondering, do you see a role of the societal objectification of women and the hypersexualization and the norms around submission, specifically of women in sex to men? And do you see these societal pressures as having a coercive impact on someone who might film themselves having sex for free, but it might be impacted by societal coercion to some degree?
Well, I'm thinking of it on, I guess, like a philosophical plane. And I don't think that is necessarily a societal force. So I guess that is the point where I might disagree, because it's like the type, it's a type of thing where it's like, I don't think that drive is socially constructed. Yeah, I don't think that the drive
to film yourself having sex and distribute it.
Yeah, I don't think that's socially constructed. I think that's just human nature. I think
camera is part of human nature.
Well,
sorry.
Is it human nature to eat packaged food? No, but it's human nature to eat the food we eat.
I see what you're saying. So there's this base human sexual drive, and you're saying that people are finding modern applications for it that aren't inherently harmful. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the source of it's not inherently harmful. It's like, human.
You mean the internal source, like the desire to do this or to consume it? Yeah,
right. That's what I'm saying. That's not harmful. And, it's like, and this is one of the reasons I love Dostoevsky, is because he portrays the worst elements of human behavior, like the worst things that humans do that you could ever think of. And he doesn't in any way excuse or justify them, but he's showing that that's a part of us. That is a part of who we are. And another part of who we are is to be good and virtuous and loving and caring for each other and to be gentle. But it's also a part of us. We are animals. We are human animals. And like other animals, we attack. Unlike other animals, we torture. I don't think other animals do what we do. I don't think they hurt sadistically. And that deeply bothers me, that humans are sadistic. But we are. And I don't think it's socially constructed.
Yeah, so instead of debating on the feminist merits of porn or not, I kind of want to engage with you on this level that it seems like you're at right now, which is this idea of human nature. And I think we actually agree a lot on that. Like pretty much everything that you just said, and like the most recent thing that you just said, I agree with. I do think that it's almost impossible to say that there is not a sexual component of human nature. It just makes no sense evolutionarily. Like it just doesn't make sense. A species wouldn't exist if there was no sexual desire. So I think there might be some, I don't know, I've never heard of a genuine argument against that, but I do totally agree with you that humans have sexual desire and that's not an inherently evil thing. or inherently bad or inherently anti-woman or anything along those lines. And I do think that recognizing a sexual aspect of you to whatever degree that is, and finding what feels true for you outside of what society expects of you, especially as a woman, is a really important part in having a healthy relationship with your sexuality. That's not just focused on repression. I think one of the things, and maybe this is a little bit off topic, but just going off this human nature thing, is I think that the female natural sexuality is often misaligned with the male natural sexuality. And not always, but I think that this is part of why we struggle to have a really equal consensual footing in a society where men ultimately have power and they want more sex. And I mean, again, going back to the evolution, we see why this makes sense, why men would have a higher drive to have sex versus women have it a lot more rarely, with the desire to, have a few number of children that are protected in the long term, et cetera. So all this, I think, is just to say that if we're acknowledging the biological basis of human evolution and sexual desire, and now you haven't said whether or not you agree with this, but if you agree that men just based on evolution will have a misaligned sexual drive with women, and if you agree that men in society have more power than women, I guess I'm just wondering then how you say that you don't see any social construction around what a female's sexual desires might be. And especially when we see women who appear to be consistently meeting the exact male desire, that seems really convenient to me in a way that I think if that woman were not pressured by men was not living in a society where men had the power to exert their desire on an entire other class of people, I guess I just don't necessarily believe that women are not coerced societally and on an individual level by men into rising to meet their sexual demands.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so to ask you the same question or similar question, is it a purely social, a purely socially motivated or socialized thing that makes people, or that would in this hypothetical situation make people make a video of themselves having sex and make other people consuming it? Do you think that is nothing to do with human nature?
No, I think that it's both social and natural. I think that it's really hard to say any single one aspect of human behavior beyond eating, drinking water, breathing is entirely nature or nurture. So no, I agree with you that there definitely is a nature component. Yeah.
And is it always harmful for that to happen?
So is what harmful? The filming?
Yeah, and consuming. The filming and the consuming.
Yeah, so I don't think that filming is inherently harmful. I think that if two people genuinely want to film, whatever, yes, let's do the whole play the game of let's remove all question of full consent, then yeah, I don't think there's anything necessarily harmful in the very act of filming itself. But what I do think is that given the current society that we're in, there are so many other confounding variables that do make it harmful. So for example, we know that sex tapes are a huge source of perceived and real threat to women. So for example, if a man knows that there is a sex tape of a woman, then that man actually has power over her because there's the constant threat that it will be released. And I mean, this is actually something I can speak to personally. I went through an abusive relationship where I was coerced into taking part in filmed sexual acts that I did not want to be a part of. And to this day, I'm pretty sure that that man has those videos and he could do something with them if he wanted to. And to imagine that that is not a threat over my ability to leave that relationship, to speak out against his abuse of me, to go to the police, to write articles using his real name, like it absolutely is. And now that's a situation where, of course, the coercion was there, but even if the coercion wasn't, the threat in a society that treats women the way that we do remains. And so on the filming side of it, to answer that specifically, I don't think there's anything inherently evil about setting up a camera, clicking record, and doing what you were going to do anyways. But I think that in our current society, it's a really dangerous thing for a woman to do. And that doesn't mean that she is evil for doing it, but it means that as a feminist concerned about the safety and protection of women, I don't want it to happen because I don't want her to have that threat and to be coerced going forward in her relationship with that man, even if there wasn't coercion in the first place. So that's just on the filming side. On the consumption side, I think that it is too hard to separate the social objectification and place of women in society from sexualization. And I think that there is, so for one, we know this from what we've been seeing it coming out with Pornhub recently, is you can't know whether or not there was coercion. If for example, someone saw a video of me and my ex, they would have no reason to think that it was coerced. It's that amateur style that you're talking about. It's there's no money exchanging hands. I'm clearly not a porn star. Like, you would have no reason to know that there was coercion there. So number one, you don't know what you're looking at. And even if you did, then yeah, I just think that there's no way to really separate that from the sexual objectification of women that keeps women as a lower class in society. And I think that as long as we are in patriarchy, where women's value is based on sex, is based on desire to men, is based on how much they're breeding and producing little soldiers for the next generation. Like all of that, I think, is so tied up in sexual politics that we cannot actually live in this hypothetical world where consent is universal and there is no social coercion and there's no harms of looking at a woman having sex. I just don't buy that those can really be separated in the real world. Although I guess I'm not opposed to some hypothetical universe where it's not an inherently bad thing. And I don't think it's inherently bad. I think it's bad because of the society that we're in.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, I think good points were made all around. I'll just give myself a little
I think that this was really interesting because I definitely, from the first thing that you said that started us on this conversation, I assumed something about what your position was. And I thought, wow, I really don't know this woman. And like, oh, wow, maybe we don't agree on as much as I thought. And the more that I gave you the space to actually elaborate, the more that it's, oh, wait, no, I agree with that. Okay, there's the single point of disagreement. And I think that in doing that, I then kind of came back around to saying, like you're still the same person who I met and respected because you were a critical thinker and respected because you care about women and who's willing to question things and speak out against orthodoxy. And then I was able to return to that initial framework that I have of you and see, oh, wait, yes, you're still the same Sasha that I thought you were, even though, I really disagree with your opinion on this.
Wow. Okay. So I love that because that is just the basis of what we all need in America right now, which is that we can look at people as just people and not in a different moral standing based on their opinion. Although that's actually a slight smidgen different from what you just said, but adding to it. And then also, I just want to say, this issue is so emotional for a lot of us, for both of us. And it's one of the issues that I used to lose sleep over. And, the abuses that are occurring in the porn industry right now, I think probably shouldn't be left unsaid because there are women whose lives and bodies are being destroyed right now as we speak for entertainment. and it is appalling if you do even just a tiny bit of research on it. But what I've noticed again and again is people will not engage with this discussion because they will not acknowledge that those harms are, it's a human rights issue. It's a human rights issue.
Yes.
And what I am saying is totally fine has nothing to do with the human rights violations that are happening. And people can't acknowledge those human rights abuses because,
right.
And this is just a hypothesis that this might not be true of them, but that because they are so attached and stuck on that idea of like, wait, but sexuality is innate and normal and healthy and good. And I guess what I've come to lately is I have sort of separated those things a bit. And that has made it easier for me to even explore this and to release some of that burden off my shoulders because I am allowing myself to just listen to my own intuition on it and try to understand it a little better. So, MK, I just want to say, thanks for being raw and being honest about that and for giving me the elasticity to disagree with you and to have this discussion and for asking me, for inquiring deeper into my opinions. You helped me formulate some of my thoughts. And that what I realized is that elasticity that we had with each other in the conversation is exactly what I did with myself with the porn discussion. I said, okay, so I started at this point of like, all porn is bad no matter what. Even the idea of what we were talking about, the hypothetical, that's wrong because that was in the package of the radical feminist beliefs. And so that, though, didn't quite work. I couldn't quite understand that because on one hand, you've got like some of the worst human rights abuses happening right now. And then on the other hand, you've got like, okay, just an image of a naked woman. And if those, when I was unable to make that heavy distinction between them, I was really tormented about it. I was really cut up about it. And when I gave myself a little bit of elasticity and said, Sasha, it's okay if you actually think differently on this. You don't have to just take what you've been told or what you've read. Then I realized there was nuance there. And I actually was able to get to the nuance in my own beliefs and level down the intense emotional rumination that I had on the really bad side of it.
It's really interesting because it reminds me so much of the process that I went through of actually becoming gender critical in the first place. And I think probably that's something that a lot of women can relate to, even if they disagree with your stance on this particular issue. Just the idea of you start from having a strong belief. And I think that this is actually something that our culture encourages, is having a very strong belief about something that you don't necessarily know anything about and you haven't had time to form, like what you were saying before about our education system. So I think that a lot of us who have gotten to the point where we're watching this video probably have already gone through this process at least once of starting with a strong belief and then having to negotiate with ourselves about how much of this do I actually really believe and where is the nuance in there. And I think that for gender critical people, sometimes we can be really tempted to go then in the opposite extreme and to find that opposite label, that opposite like box to put ourselves in, because it's a lot easier to be in a box. It's a lot easier, and I mean, in a lot of ways, not every way, but it's a lot easier to know who your people are, where you stand, what your relationship is supposed to be with any other person or organization, because you fit cleanly in this box. But I think that does end up being really harmful to your psyche because you are not able to acknowledge the parts of you that maybe are heterodox in this way, that step outside the box. And so you end up suppressing that, pushing it down, and this causes these negative feelings to arise. And so I would encourage people, I guess, to, if you are having a lot of negative feelings in the movement, I think that a good way to do this is to really start examining every part of it. And just because you've, gone from one side to the other, it doesn't mean that you need to force yourself into a new box. And hopefully, I found that the people who end up actually being the most productive, and I use that term very loosely, but the people who I see really doing kind of great, amazing things right now in this movement are people who I think are willing to see themselves not as a physical embodiment of every radical feminist ideology, like principle that's ever existed, but rather who are just people who are finding a way to, live out what they really truly believe and make something good in the world out of it and find a place for themselves there. So I would encourage people to go through that process. And especially if you see a friend going through that process, you don't need to demonize them for it. Like you can actually get closer with your friend. I feel closer to you now after that conversation than I did before it. And even though we just had a big disagreement. And I think that like this process of being able to disagree with yourself will make it easier for you to find a way to disagree with others in a healthy and productive way.
Very well said. Absolutely. And also to reiterate the fact that we did have this deep, I think, philosophical disagreement, or maybe not, I don't know, but we clashed on something that I would say was philosophical, but we still want to work together to end the harms being done to women. We still want to work together to fight the abuses being justified against women. And we still want to join together to fight the regressive gender ideology. So we can have those clashes on certain things, but I would never in a million years say, oh, well, then I don't want to work with MK. I mean, not even like you said, I actually do feel close. I feel more affinity towards you and respect for you. But even,
and I think it also helps.
I want to not work with you is what I was trying to say.
Yeah. And I think it also helps our movement because you bringing those ideas to me also force me to examine some maybe holes in my own ideology. And it means that you can not strengthen your argument in the sense that you're always going to like have the same position and I'm just like, sharpening my sword on you. I think it's more that if these are real problems that we really want to solve in the real world, then the more we can have discussions with people who share the end goal. And we, like you just said, share the end goal of ending harms and abuses to women in our society, including sexual abuse, then we are able to find like new and creative ways to do that and examine really where are the points of agreement, especially because those I think are key focus areas, the things that like most people who share your same goal can agree on.
Yeah, absolutely. And to the point of where you need to hear opposing viewpoints and this is just like also a bit of advice for our audience is like, expose yourself to the people you don't like what they're saying. If you think that Jordan Peterson is one who's been effective for this for me because he talks, I'm like, I don't agree with that. Well, then why? Because he's smart. He makes solid arguments. And so he makes you reach deep down inside yourself. And if you want to disagree with him, you're going to have to come back strong with a really solid argument. That's what a professor should do is disrupt the ideas you just held uncritically and make you actually formulate them and figure them out. And so don't avoid the people you disagree with. Seek them out.
And I think that the best friends that you have should be people who help you, form a more critical and nuanced opinion in your life. I think that those are good friends to have because they're not people who will then reject you when you suddenly have a nuanced opinion, something, a lot of us have gone through or are afraid of going through. If you have friends who are open to nuance and if you yourself are open to nuance and finding, points of disagreement and expanding on them and having these discussions, then you're going to be around friends who will be there for you despite your disagreements.
Yeah, exactly. And there are not many people you can have a conversation like this with. I know that from experience, and this showed me that we can, and that's amazing, and that's valuable.
I totally agree. I'm really grateful we did this.
Yeah, me too. Thank you, MK, for being so raw and for letting it happen like that.
Yeah, and thank you for being brave to say this opinion that I think a lot of our audience will disagree with, and that takes some guts. I hope that,
Some will
you
be there
know.
thinking, oh, I was thinking the same thing. One thing I've learned, anything I think, it means other people are thinking it.
You're right.
And I have, it means other people have the question.
You're right. I shouldn't assume. I don't know. I mean, that's the thing. I think we have this tendency to make assumptions about what people are thinking based on what we're seeing
Mhm.
in the mainstream. And this is actually, I think, again, ties back to the whole gender critical debate. We think that we're in a minority being gender critical because we only see the trans ideology being pushed in the mainstream, when polling that happens in private actually shows that the opposite is true, that the majority of people disagree with policies that would put men and women's sports, for example. But we don't hear those opinions on the news and in the media, so we think that we're alone in it. And I think that that's just another reason why it's worth being able to find your own space with your ideas, and then to find people who are willing to discuss that with you, because you might not be as alone as you think.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. On that note, I think we can wrap it up there.
Yeah,
Um,
I think so.
yeah, awesome. Thank you guys for tuning in. This is Identity Crisis, and we have new episodes every Monday.
Be sure to like, subscribe, and follow us on everywhere. Just follow us all across the internet.